Hi everybody, this is Stefan Johansson and you're listening to Beyond the Grid.
Hi everyone and welcome to your favourite place here in podcast land. It's Beyond the Grid with me, Tom Clarkson. Unfortunately, I'm starting this episode on a sombre note because like everyone, I was horrified to hear late last week about Alex Zanardi's terrible handbike accident while competing in a road race in Italy. Alex was my guest on last week's show, and anyone who's listened to our conversation will be in no doubt as to his courage and resilience. And to hear what happened to him just 2 days after our show went out was sickening. As we release this week's show, Alex remains in hospital in a serious condition, his prognosis uncertain. I have everything crossed for you, my friend, and wish you a swift and full recovery, and I'm sure all of you out there feel the same way. As for this week's show, my guest is none other than Stefan Johansson, F1's 80 spec Super Swede. I've long been a fan of his, since first seeing him race at the 1983 British Grand Prix at Silverstone. That race was his Grand Prix debut, and I remember loving his black helmet and beefy-looking Spirit Honda. He out-qualified reigning world champion Keke Rosberg too, and no one does that by accident. His career was to be one of highs and lows. He scored 12 podiums, and he deserved to win several races. But Ferrari team orders or lady luck always intervened at the crucial moment. But Stefan can still be hugely proud of what he achieved. He drove for two of the sport's biggest teams, Ferrari and McLaren, and he stacked up well against three of the fastest teammates a driver could ever have: Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, and Stefan Bellof. That's quite a list, and a lot of memories. And luckily for us, Stefan is one of the most articulate racing drivers ever to have sat behind the wheel of a Formula One car. Some of the stories he tells are jaw-dropping, and not only about the teams and individuals he came into contact with, but about Formula One in the 1980s more generally. And he's very funny too, particularly about the 1987 Austrian Grand Prix, which was an especially tough weekend. So sit back and enjoy hearing from one of Formula One's 80s megastars. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Stefan, it is lovely to have you on the show. We're staring at each other down a Zoom lens. Look, where in the world are you, for goodness sake?
I'm in Santa Monica, California.
And that is home now, I guess.
Yep, California's been home for 16 years now, actually. The US, almost 25.
So when was the last time you saw snow?
Well, funny enough, last week, believe it or not, because I was actually in Park City, Utah for a couple of days, and they still have snow on the mountains there. But, I go back to Europe very often. So, I'm in Sweden 5-6 times a year on average, I would say, and have been throughout the whole time I've been over here. So I get a bit of a dose of the home country every now and then.
And you're running various businesses out of California now, including a management company, which includes IndyCar stars Scott Dixon and Felix Rosenqvist. But how much are you still involved and watching Formula One?
Well, I'm not involved in the capacity where I actually do any work, but I'm following it very, very closely. And I love racing. It's my life, and I'm a big fan still. And I do follow it quite closely, and do my own observations. I do my little blog, where I comment on things every now and then, and I keep in touch with quite a lot of friends in the business still. So, you sort of try to get the inside scoop on bits and pieces that's going on.
How do you reflect then on your career in Formula One?
Well, it was okay, I guess. That's the best way to describe it. It wasn't, the timing wasn't always the best, and the results, you always want more, of course, but at the end of the day, I had a pretty good run. I was there for almost 10 years, so it wasn't the worst.
An incredible era, actually, wasn't it? So first race 1980, last race 1991. Which cars did you prefer? The sort of turbo monsters of the sort of mid-80s, or the smaller, slightly more refined cars of the early 90s?
I think, the best era, in my opinion, in history of F1 was probably the turbo era. The cars were insane. so much horsepower and very little grip. It was so free and completely over the top. Just whatever you could come up with, it was okay, and just go for it. Aero had really just started to come into the picture. So, of course, it made a difference, but nowhere near the difference it makes today, where everything is about aero. And the engines were just insane.
How difficult was it to control those cars? Let's talk about 85, 86, 87 when you were at Ferrari and McLaren. Everyone talks about them being beasts and crazy. I mean, did you sort of have to take a deep breath as you were starting a quali lap?
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, even at the track like Monza, which is very long straights and long gears, you were getting wheel spin going from fifth to sixth, going down to the parabolica, So, I mean, it was just insane. So, I mean, it was definitely exhilarating, and you had to kind of adapt, completely different driving style where you were just kind of hugging the inside of the corner to the last moment. So you had as much room as possible on the exit. When the thing would light up, all hell would break loose. And you would just needed as much room as possible to kind of gather it all together and try to get, I mean, let's say you're in second gear and the engine lit up. I mean, by the time you hit the curb on the outside, you were already in fourth gear. We said bump, 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 bump. I mean, you couldn't shift quick enough. Manual shift as well. So the gear shift was actually probably the one thing that had more effect on the lap time than anything else, just on the upshift, because how quickly you could shift, And
was there much lag in those turbo engines?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, definitely. I mean, on the lower gears, yeah. I mean, once you were on the cam, there was no lag. But when you were feeding the throttle on the slow corner and power came in, and then when it came in, it was like a light switch,
Amazing. But I remember that's when I was falling in love with Formula One. Stefan, that you have met and worked with so many of Formula One's great personalities of that era that I thought it was quite a good way to talk about your story using those personalities to help tell the story. So let's talk about Ron Dennis, for example, McLaren boss, but you won the British Formula 3 championship for him in 1980 and then raced again for him in Formula 1 in 1987. Can you just describe your relationship with Ron?
Well, I mean, Ron, I think of all the team owners that I worked with first of all, even when we were doing Project 4, with F3 before he even had the F1 team, his attention to details was just beyond anything else, really. I mean, the preparation was always immaculate. Everything was just kind of the best it could be in that kind of narrow little box we worked in right then. But once he got into Formula One, of course, every year he kept moving the goalposts for everybody, really, and everybody had to kind of follow, I think McLaren was the first team that really got into aerodynamics in a big way. Obviously, they were the first with the carbon fiber. But not only that, but just like the appearance of the team, the motorhomes, the pit lane. I mean, everything was always one step above the rest. As a driver, it's an amazing environment to work in, because you always know you get the best you can get, So everything is there for you to get your job done, basically.
And that was even the case in Formula 3?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, everything was just immaculate, and also as a team boss, I mean, you kind of felt he really cared, about not just what you did on the track, but more like a little bit like a father figure in a way, So you always had a great level of comfort and support, it felt like, to really do the best you can, basically, on the track.
And for people who aren't that familiar with your early years, you'd already driven 2 races in Formula 1 at that point, or tried to, for Shadow.
Yeah.
And did Ron, in a way, sort of scoop you up after that disappointment? Or was that Formula 3 season already in the bag when you accepted to do those early races for Shadow?
No. So Ron came in kind of shortly after that, and we had talked from the season before. And I mean, obviously Ron had a, eye on the bigger picture. I mean, I think I was just a small cog in that whole thing to get to the Marlboro program, basically. But he really put the effort into, because I had almost done a deal with Tim Schenken and Howden Ganley with Tiger to do the F3 with them. And then Ron came in and put on the whole sales pitch, and convinced everybody. And that's where I ended up in the end.
And during that season, were you aware of the Formula One ambitions for the team? I mean, were you aware that John Barnard was probably beavering away somewhere, making a carbon composite chassis?
It became evident through the season. I didn't know anything about it when we started the F3 season. But there was this, we used to call it the fish tank, this sort of little mezzanine level on the Project 4 shop, and there was these sort of blacked out windows on the top. And there was these three strange characters up there, which was JB Barnard and Alan Jenkins and Steve Nichols. So those three were sitting up there, we were like, well, what's going on up there, and then it sort of become gradually evident, and it's funny because that F3 car we had, the March, was not a very good car that year, the 803. So John, we had all sorts of crazy development stuff, then John used to come testing and try to figure out how to make it work. We had different side pods made, all sorts of stuff,
That must have been quite something for a young guy, because Barnard had already, worked in Formula One. He'd had success in Indy cars as well. I think he won that year's Indy 500, didn't he? And were you aware just that what the opportunity you were having laid in front of you? Were you aware of just how big it was?
No, not at the time. I wasn't really, and so, don't forget, Ron had Andrea De Cesaris and Chico Serra in the F2 team at the same time. So they were like one step in front of me in that kind of hierarchy anyway. And of course, Andrea ended up getting the drive in the end, for obvious reasons. So that wasn't really something that I had in mind at the time. And like I said, I was only at the very end of the year that just sort of started to become evident what the ultimate goal was. I remember, actually, it's funny. So my manager at the time, Staffan Svenby, who also was Ronnie's manager before, it was kind of touch and go there to put the deal together with McLaren, I think, for Ron. And he was offered, I can't remember the exact, but it was peanuts, for 10% of the company just to close the deal. And he turned it down. And I think for the next 15 years, Ron would never cease to remind him how much his 10% would have been worth if he bought into it,
Oh my goodness, yes. Poor him. I mean, actually, but also he did manage Ronnie Peterson, as you say. And what is it about, the Swedes and Formula One? Because obviously Ronnie, great driver. There have been so many others as well with, Joe Bonnier and Gunnar Nilsson. And did you grow up idolizing those guys, Ronnie in particular?
Well, Ronnie in particular, yeah, because Ronnie was a bit of a hero, even in the karting days, he was one of those that was just able to do magic all the time, so he was a legend even when he was like 15 years old in Sweden. Everyone, oh my God, Ronnie, he sort of carried on that legacy, obviously, till the day he passed. So he was definitely a bit of a hero, but I got to know him because I actually ended up staying at his little cottage out in Maidenhead, just outside of Maidenhead, renting the cottage out there. In fact, the year he got killed was when I started living out there, So I didn't know him very well, I can't say, but we got to know each other a little bit during that period,
And he was wanting to look after the next generation.
Yeah, he was, and with Staffan, who was his manager, they started helping Eje Elg first, and then I kind of came in at the tail end of that right as Ronnie passed, because, they'd already done a deal with McLaren for the following year. And part of, which was the Marlboro sponsored cars, obviously. So I think part of that was to try to finagle a little program for me as well, in F3.
And was Ronnie's death at Monza in 78, was it one of those moments for you where you can remember exactly where you were and what you were doing? And
yeah, 100%. I know exactly where it's like I have the picture, like a photograph in front of me. So I was in a friend's house. in a town just outside where I lived in Sweden, and we were there watching the race. And it was a terrible, terrible day for everybody in Sweden, really, because it was, that never happened before, so it was a big, big deal.
How did that knock your ambitions in racing? Did it make you think twice about what you wanting to do?
No, not really. No, no, it never did. That's all I wanted to do. And, any setback, it was just, you just kind of regroup.
Well, what about Andrea de Cesaris then? When you heard that he was getting the McLaren Formula One drive in 1981 and you weren't, and you'd had such a good year with Ron in 1980, how much of a setback was that?
Andrea and I we were actually roommates. We shared an apartment at that time in Woking, Andrea and I. I knew that I wasn't really in the running for that. There was never, I don't think there was ever on the cards that I was going to get into that car. Andrea, as we all know, had extremely strong connections, with Marlboro and everything. So I think that was a given, that was part of the deal almost.
Yeah, but he only did the 1 year, didn't he? And Ron famously said he was never going to have another Italian drive his cars again. And he was true to his word.
That's true, actually. I never thought of that,
yeah. More from Stefan in just a moment. But first this. We know our loyal listeners of Beyond the Grid are scattered all over the world. But how many of you have bilingual abilities, I wonder? I'm sure many of you do. And I'm also sure there are some of you out there like me who are always keen to learn something new, and mastering a new language is high on that list. Well, Babbel can help you do just that. Babbel is designed to get you speaking a new language within weeks. With daily 10 to 15 minute lessons, that is all it takes to help you feel confident speaking in your chosen language. There are 14 different languages to choose from, including French, Spanish, Italian, German, Portuguese, and Swedish, like our good friend Stefan Johansson. And the beauty of Babbel is that it teaches real-life conversation, so you can learn through interactive dialogue, while its inbuilt speech recognition technology helps you improve your accent and pronunciation. And what's more, the lessons are created by more than 100 language experts. Yes, real people. And you can really tell the difference this makes to the learning experience compared to relying on translation machines. Babbel is available as an app or online, so no matter where or when you log on to a lesson, your progress will be synced across all devices. And that's good news for me if I'm going to try and squeeze in any last-minute lessons before I'm back on the road, travelling to races come the start of July. What have we got? 8 races in 10 weeks in 6 different countries. That's busy enough, and Babbel will be my companion. So try Babbel today. Just go to babbel.co.uk or download the app for free. That's Babbel, babbel.co.uk, or download the app for free. Babbel, learn a new language and make it your own. Right, let's get back to our chat with Stefan. You did race for Ron in Formula One in 1987, and just tell us a little bit about how that deal came about.
Well, so I did the 2 years with with Ferrari before that, of course. We always kept in touch, we were always, and we went, sometimes between races, we went together and, with our girlfriends, I think at the time, and so on. So we always had a kind of a good connection. And when Keke decided to retire, and then, the situation with Ferrari was a bit fluid, then, it kind of happened organically, it was, it just kind of built up to that, and then we did the deal sometime at the beginning of the year there, I think, well, maybe the end of the year before, actually, yeah.
You must have been so hopeful coming into that year with McLaren. They dominated the previous championships.
Yeah.
What were your first impressions of the McLaren MP4-3 when you tested it for the first time?
Well, I'd had almost no testing before I think I had like 30 laps around the Rio track before the actual race. It was very, very little testing because I think the car was finished late and this and that, Prost obviously was well embedded with the team. So I had very little time in the car, but the car was solid, but it was never that wasn't an easy car. It was, even Prost, had a tough time with that car. It was very nervous, you didn't really have a lot of comfort in the car, It was quick. You could get a quick lap out of it, but it was not an easy car to just go out and, it was hard to get any confidence in the car. had a very, very nervous rear end, and not only nervous, but kind of unpredictable, so it's hard to know where the limit was, and when you hit the limit, it was too late. So it was a tough one to go out and commit fully, because you just never quite sure what was going to happen next,
So not only are you going to that first race with very little testing, but did you also feel that you were very much walking into Alain Prost's team? Did you feel the whole thing was set up around him?
I very quickly realized that I did. In a good way, I have to say, because Prost, was really he was the standard for all the drivers. I mean, the first debriefs, my brain was just fried. I mean, the amount of information that came out of him, was just like overwhelming, how detailed he was in all this, because then we had no data really to rely on from computers or any sensors of the car or anything. So it was really, really, really important, the feedback from the driver. So initially it was really hard. It was just so much information, and but then, after a few sessions, you sit in a room and you kind of realize that it was all very structured and it was you sort of start breaking it down. And then you start to understand how his whole thinking worked, and I have to say, I mean, in that 1 year with him, I probably learned more than I did in my entire career, but it was something I could carry with me wherever I went after that. He was just phenomenal. I mean, I think even Ayrton, when he came there the next year, he elevated his game to a whole other level, because he had natural talent like no driver has ever had possibly. But then he also got to see that structured, organized, sort of very detailed part, which then raised his game to a whole other level as well.
And do you feel that you raised your game during that season?
Yeah, oh, absolutely I did. Yeah, no question about it. Yeah.
I mean, you got 5 podiums to Alain's 7. Do you feel that you gave a good account of yourself that year? Do you feel could have done more? Or
I think in the circumstances, yes. I mean, obviously, we were both unlucky, in fact, in some races, and so they had a lot of reliability issues with the engine in particular. I finished 6th and Prost was 4th in the championship, and I think I can't remember how many points. It was 15 points behind. So I mean, if you compare almost anyone to Alain Prost, I think I did all right, because he was, truly on a different level than everybody else at that particular time, I think. And there was, one race I think I could have won, which was Spa, when he lost all his, the instrumentation on the car. So I kind of they had to rely on my info. I mean, I could have lied and just, told him something else and caught him, but, I figured out, to my detriment, did the right thing. I should have probably just been a bit naughty, but there you go.
And of your 12 podiums in Formula One, which was the best? Not just at McLaren, but of all 12?
Well, I don't know, actually. I never really thought. I mean, the best was probably the ones that I didn't get a podium, because, there was races which I could have won that didn't happen for whatever reason. Canada, I would have won for sure if it hadn't been team orders. I finished 2nd behind Michaela. That was my second or third race with the team. Detroit, I would have won if the brake rotor hadn't exploded with a lap to go. So, finished 2nd behind Keke there. So, but, I don't really like to dwell on shoulda, coulda, woulda, because everybody's got a shoulda, coulda, woulda story, So, it is what it is.
On the other end of the spectrum, there was Austria 87, wasn't there? Where you had that crash on Friday when you hit the deer, and then in the race you were involved in the start line crash, and then you had the problem after the pit stop with the wheel. I mean, can you just reflect?
It was the crash with the deer and everything. It was just insane too. I almost freaking got killed. So I was with Willie Dungle. I don't know if you remember him, the guy who was the Niki Lauda's physio, and he worked with me and a few other people. Anyway, so, we're in Austria, and, I broke a couple of ribs when I had the accident with the deer. But I drove with broken ribs the whole weekend, which was painful beyond description, as you can imagine, because how painful a broken rib is. So Willie was going to take me he had some house at the back of over by the back, behind the Bosch curve. So I'm on the back of his bloody moped or some scooter. We're driving up there. So he was going to, had a bet on it. He was going to do some treatment for me. So we're chugging along on his little scooter. I'm on the back, and some pissed drunk Austrian, whatever, just goes ballistic. And he hit me like straight, it nearly knocked me out. I mean, I'm on my back, I'm completely out of it on the ground. It knocked me right off the scooter, almost took my head off. So now I don't only have the rip, but I also had a freaking headache. Like I could barely see straight, you know.
It wasn't meant to be, was it?
So, no. And then we had the start line crash. And then in the race, because Ron was holding the paddle, you know, when we did the pit stop in the race, he lifted the paddle because one of the guys in the back wheel still had the gun in. And of course, when the paddle, you just go. So I just went, you know, and this freaking air gun was still stuck in the wheel. And I mean, I think we passed like 6-7 garages before the gun eventually. I mean, the air hose was like a 1/4 inch thick by the time it was stretched out. And then he came back through the pit lane about 200 miles an hour. It's a miracle it didn't kill anyone.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So the weekend was even worse than I imagined.
Yeah, it was a total disaster. Then I was 3-wheeling it back to the pits, you know, after the wheel came off. I mean, it was just a complete nightmare.
What did Ron say after the pit stop? Did he apologize or?
Yeah, I mean, well, that was the good thing with McLaren, you know, because we were able to have a good laugh all the time, you know, and I mean, I can't remember the full exact, but I mean, everybody had a really good giggle after the race, you know, because it was just one of those, what else can you do? I mean, it was just, you got to see the funny side of it.
The end of a bad weekend. But and what about the deer incident? I mean, the car was badly knocked around by that, wasn't it?
Completely destroyed.
How frightening was that?
Of all the shunts I've had, it's probably the one that gave me the shits more than any other shunt. Because, yeah, like at Indy, if you have a crash at Indy, you know, you something happens, boom, you hit the wall and that's it. It's over. But in Austria, you know, it's in the morning, so the grass is all a bit wet from the night before, you know, and this runoff is like 200, 300 meter runoff almost, you know. So you have a lot of time to think that, and you know it's going to be a big one because the car isn't slowing down even half a kilometer, you know, when you're in the wet grass. So I mean, when the deer hit, it ripped the left front suspension right out of the pickup points. It was just 4 holes basically where the pickup points were. So it took the, you know, I had no brakes, I had no steering, took the rear left corner off as well. So I'm just a total passenger, you know. I mean, the only thing I remember is I had enough time to take the wheel out of the car, you know, the quick fit, and just pull my legs up as close to me as I could in case it hit front first. But lucky it kind of slid around and he hit backwards first, so which took a lot of the impact. But it was enough to crack 2 of my ribs, you know. So it was a pretty painful week.
Were there no yellow flags from the marshals?
No, I mean, nothing, not even a warning, nothing. And apparently the deer had been running around there for a good 5 minutes, you know. And, you know, Ron was livid because we found out, you know, and I mean, he had basically a destroyed car. So, I mean, the cost for the team obviously was not insignificant because it was a write-off basically.
We won't dwell on too many bad memories, I promise. But I did also just want to ask you about 87. At what point was it clear to you that you were going to have to find another job in 88? At what point were you told that Senna was on his way?
You know what? It could have actually been that same weekend.
No.
Now, anyway, I never thought of that, but I think it was the same weekend, in fact. And I love Australia. You know, it's a great country, but it clearly didn't do me any favors that week. Yeah, actually, now you mention it, I think it was almost certain it was that weekend, yeah.
There was a bit of speculation, wasn't there, that the deal...
Yeah.
Did you know in advance that it was probably going to happen? Senna to McLaren?
To be honest, I knew there was a chance even before the season started that might be what happened, you know, if everything kind of fell into place on their discussions. So, but, you know, it's still, of the options I had, I still felt it was a better option than, you know, because, you know, I had the chance of going with a world championship winning team, basically, or at the time it was, you know, and Ferrari at that time really wasn't, you know, I knew that it wasn't going to be much better in 87 than it was in 86, which really wasn't the case for many years after that, in fact.
We'll come on to Ferrari. Just while we're talking about Senna, he's a guy actually that you know better than most because you were teammates at Tolman at the end of 84 and stacked up pretty well, it has to be said. What was your take on Senna as a racing driver, his strengths, his weaknesses, and don't be modest. How do you think you compared?
Well, I mean, at the time, I mean, like we did the first race in Portugal, and we were pretty close. I mean, I was actually quicker than him the first day, and I only found out about 3 years later on, or 4 years later on, one of my mechanics finally, had left the team and told me, well, Senna had us take your engine and put it in his car.
No, really?
Yeah, for real. Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, that kind of summed it up, which, I mean, you have to admire that, that you have that drive and, that's no compromise, because in his mind, I guess it was unfathomable that I could be quicker than him. So it had to be a reason. So there you go, and I mean, he's an incredibly intense guy, and I think had he been a bank manager or he would have been the best banker in the world. It was just that mindset, relentless at being the best at whatever he did. And obviously he had a God-given talent, that was a natural talent that you could see from his early days in karting again. There was just the raw talent was just amazing.
Did he help you in any way? He'd been there all year apart from Monza. Did he try and tell you about the car, how to help you set it up or
no? Not really, to be honest, no.
Okay. But you didn't make it easy for yourself in 1984, let's face it, because not only did you go up against Ayrton Senna in the same car, you thought you'd put yourself up against Stefan Bellof as well.
Yeah.
Who was incredibly highly rated. And it has to be said that you stacked up very favourably against Bellof.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think he only out-qualified me one race, but I beat him in all the races. And yeah, Bellof definitely, I think I had the best of him.
Let's say something positive about Austria, because the Austrian Grand Prix in 84, you and Bellof are in the Tyrrell, and you out-qualified him by, I think, 1.6 seconds or something.
Yeah, it was massive. I mean, I was really on a roll then too, I've been really on top of it. I did so much driving that year too. I was racing in Japan, I was doing Group C in Europe, I was doing F1, every weekend I was in a different car, and it really does help. But Austria, I always loved. I mean, I love high-speed corners. That was my thing. To just balance the car on the edge the whole time. For a long corner, just maintain the speed. So I loved Austria, and I'm not sure Bellof was a huge fan. So I think, and he was kind of, we had no chance of even qualifying almost. So I don't think he was particularly motivated. Whereas I was extremely motivated. Because I really wanted to get back into Formula One in full time.
Do you think your performance against Bellof was when the big teams first sort of stood up and took notice of you? Is that when Ferrari first went, hang on, who is this kid?
A little bit, yeah. But I think really, Ferrari was mainly the big dice I had with Nicky in Portugal in the Tolman. I think that got his attention more than anything, because immediately after that, they started making contact and, inquiring about next year and, maybe do a test or.
Can we put some flesh on that bone for people who can't remember? So you're at Portugal, you're in the Tolman. We now know that Senna's got a better engine than you. But Niki Lauda, you're a complete thorn in his side. But what are your memories of that race?
Yeah, no, I mean, the car was great. I mean, that Tolman car, first of all, was a great car. I mean, Rory Byrne and Pat Simmons, obviously they had a pretty decent career after that car, in their own way. So, I mean, Rory is a genius, I think, still is to this day. The car was very nice to drive, really, really good car. And the Hart engine was strong at that time. The car was definitely really competitive, and I just felt comfortable. I felt I had pretty good control of things as well. So, and I had a pretty epic battle with Nicky, and the only thing I remember, I was always surprised at how lack of aggression he had, let's say, to try to get by. He didn't really make any big moves or any big attempts, until quite late in the race, really. And then kind of the race just kind of fell in his lap, with the other people, so on. But I felt I had pretty good control of the situation the whole time.
And do you think Nicky put in a word for you with the guys at Ferrari?
No, I doubt it, because he was really pissed off with me afterwards. We became really good friends kind of through that later on, but I remember we met that winter in Kitzbühel for the ski week. and he was all grumpy, ooh, and he had to wear it. Then we sort of got drunk, and then we became really good friends after that, so.
We'll delve even further into the world of Stefan Johansson after this brief message for anyone searching for a little motivation to take their training regime up a notch. Gymshark is a conditioning brand that is dedicated to creating functional training apparel, designing innovative performance technologies, and building passionate, empowered communities. Conditioning is everything we do today that prepares us for tomorrow, which, as we all know, is a huge part of training for any sports person. And a message we could all do with a little reminder of sometimes, especially when it comes to working consistently towards our fitness goals. Gymshark has a great backstory. It was formed in 2012 in a garage in Birmingham in the UK, and it has emerged as a leading brand in gym apparel with a worldwide family of over 15 million people in more than 150 countries. And if you check out their stuff, it's easy to see why. Gymshark were kind enough to send me some of their clothes. And one of the many things I like about it is the breathable qualities of the material. It still feels fresh, even when you've been on a running machine for 30 minutes. And that's saying something because I sweat a lot. Gymshark are a community dedicated to unlocking potential, and they work with a huge range of athletes and creators such as Ross Edgley, Ryan Garcia, Katie Taylor, Matt Does Fitness, and Obi Vincent. And lucky for you, Gymshark will be running a 24-hour sale on Thursday, the 25th of June at 7 p.m. BST. That's Thursday, the 25th of June at 7 p.m. BST, with up to 50% off select lines. So set yourself a reminder and go over and check out their website, gymshark.com/beyond the grid. That's gymshark.com/beyond the grid. Right, let's get back to Stefan. Can you remember your first visit to Maranello?
Yeah, my first visit was when I got hired, actually. That was the first time I went down there. It was, the next season, 85, I was without a drive, but I went to Rio, like I'd done the year before, as the sort of with a kit with me, my helmet and the suit just in case. And then Ken decided to take Beloff out of the car because they had some dispute over something. So last minute, I got thrown in the deep end again, and ended up doing the race with the Tyrrell. Then I got a phone call the following week from Piccinini, and I lived in London at the time, and asked me if I could come and meet him at the Savoy. Sure, whatever. So then he explained, we'd like to hire you for the rest of the year. I'm like, what? That's that. So then he, explained that they're going to get rid of Arnoux. And of course, I had a contract with Tolman, but Tolman didn't have any tires. I had that, whatever dispute it was with Pirelli and Michelin, I can't remember the details, but the bottom line was that we didn't do Rio because we didn't have the tires. And that's why I was there, doing the thing with Ken, with Tyrrell. So this was like on a Monday or Tuesday before the Portuguese Grand Prix. Literally, we agree on everything in his hotel room. It took an hour, and then I had to call Alex Hawkridge and ask him, if he would release me. And of course, he said, I can't stop you. This is every driver's dream. I can't stop you doing that. So he was very kind, and released me from because I had a 3-year contract with Tolman then, So it was quite a big deal to get released out of all that. And then the next day, literally on Wednesday, I fly down to Maranello, a very secret meeting in Modena in the old factory with the old man, the Pier Paolo Gardella, which was Piccinini's sort of assistant, right-hand man, picked me up in Bologna, took me to the old factory in Modena, which was just nothing. It was just there was no activity there whatsoever. Just some old cars underneath, Onyx and stuff. And that's where I met the old man the first time, and his, son Piero and Piccinini. And after that, we went to the factory to a quick seat fitting. Did about 10 laps around Fiorano the next day, and then we flew to Portugal on the Thursday. And that was it. Thrown in the deep end,
That is one hell of a week.
Yeah.
Right, I've got so much to ask you about this. First of all, can you remember what Enzo Ferrari said to you when you signed the contract for the first time and the first time you met him?
Yeah, very, very well. So they were yapping away in Italian, and then they asked, Piccinini, and they were speaking mostly amongst themselves in Italian, and then So we're in this room, this old office of Enzo Ferrari, and no lights are on. I mean, only Ferraris, like the whole, it's like a Fellini movie, you see the sun coming through the windows to sort of barely, sort of a little bit of light there, and you see his silhouette, in the back. And so the only question he asked me was, "Are you hungry?" And I kind of understood he didn't mean if I was, physically hungry. So I said, I've never been more hungry in my life. And he said, "Okay, you're hired."
Amazing. And what is so ridiculous in a way is that this was your first full season in Formula One and you're a Ferrari driver.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, if you think so, I mean, it was really too early, I mean, I wish I'd had a couple of years full time with a midfield team to just learn the ropes, the politics, and all the shenanigans that goes on in F1. Because I was so wet behind the ears, and so naive in many ways that kind of lacked that experience you really need to be with a top team like Ferrari, just to deal with all the politics and everything as well.
So it's off track that you felt you were lacking, not on track?
No. I mean, I think on track. I mean, the first year, I mean, obviously Michele was, was already fighting for the championship. So I kind of came in at the tail end of that. And as such, I gave up at least 2 races I could have won on team orders, Shoulda, coulda, woulda again, But, I mean, it could have been a totally different scenario. But the next year, I mean, my focus was on, beating him in the championship, which is what I did. But unfortunately, the car that year was really difficult. I mean, it was not a very good car, We ended up fifth and 7th. I finished 5th, and I think Michele was 7th in the championship that year.
Imola 85. It's your second race for Ferrari.
The car was really good the whole. I was quickest in the morning practice on Saturday, so I knew we had a good shot for pole. But what happened was that I think the mechanics had somehow not tightened up the floor on the car. Anyway, long story short is the floor came loose, the whole underfloor. So the car was all over the place, and I mean, we didn't see it until the qualifying was over. The whole thing was just like moving up and down, a couple of inches. I mean, it was just aero balance was all over the place. So that's why we only qualified 15th. But even in the warm-up, we were right there on Sunday morning. And we had the game plan in place, with the fuel economy and everything. I knew exactly the datum number every lap. And I stayed in that the whole time. And I was still picking up people one after the other, So I knew I had complete control of the race. I knew it was going to get to the end.
Ayrton Senna is on his victorious way into the Rivazza, the double left.
Senna's in trouble, could be fuel, so Senna slowed right down out of the blue, and one would hand there is Stefan Johansson. Stefan Johansson goes into the lead.
You're suddenly leading the race, and every single person there thinks you're about to win this Grand Prix, your first Grand Prix.
I mean, it was incredible. I remember when I passed for the lead, I couldn't hear the engine of the car because of the sound of the crowd. It was unbelievable.
I will tell you this, that the Italian crowd is absolutely beside itself with euphoria and excitement, as well they might be. Because as James said, in that dramatic moment, Ayrton Senna has had victory snatched from him by Stefan Johansson in the Ferrari, and Stefan Johansson is now on his 58th lap out of 60.
And that's Johansson. Johansson's in trouble now. Johansson in probably in fuel trouble, and Prost has now gone into the lead.
And the damn thing runs out of fuel. Just how frustrating was that?
There was a tiny little crack in the inlet manifold, which was sucking in air. So, of course, the engine then compensated to get the same mixture. So it was pushing more fuel to get the same mixture, and that's why I ran out. Otherwise, if I ever drove a perfect race, that would have been it, because it was really on the button the whole time. And I learned a lot about that, because I did all those years in sports car racing, and that's what you did all the time with the Porsches. You had, Le Mans, all the races, in fact. So I had that technique down really well, how to really manage the fuel. And, so there you go.
Behind him, and Stefan Johansson actually smiling. Well, there is a man with courage and good humour. He will certainly be the hero of Italy, not only for having led, but for the way he deported himself, having had to retire through no fault of his own in this incredible San Marino.
I was still kind of the young kid on the block, even in the F1 paddock, because I hadn't done a full season. But I remember when I was walking back from where the car stopped to the pits, and all the team, it was a standing ovation from all the teams in the pit lane, the mechanics, everybody, which was incredible.
It's making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up even now, hearing you say that. Interesting points you make there about fuel economy and how you're driving to a lap time. You learnt to do it in sports cars, because in today's F1, the drivers are often complaining that the limiting factor is the tyres and you're not on the limit in the race. How frustrating was it for you with the fuel economy thing? Were you ever on the limit in a race?
Well, not in the sense that, you weren't, but you still have to be on the limit within those restrictions, which is actually in many ways more difficult than just being able to drive the car on the limit with everything available to you, because it's a really special technique to get the speed out of it. To be honest, I think that's why Schumacher had a little bit of an edge, because he did all those years in sports car racing. Every driver that I work with, I always encourage them to do more sports car racing, because there's no better training for racecraft than sports car racing. To race a prototype, and you do these long distance races, you have to improvise all the time. You can, there's traffic, there's weather conditions, there's dirt on the track, it's this and that. So you constantly have to improvise and kind of drive with feel all the time, So it's not, in F1 now, all you do is just go out and you drive it as quick as you can, basically, which is limited by the tire mostly now. So basically you have to just apply a different technique, that's all.
Fascinating, actually. Driving within the limit, on the limit, but within the limits of the fuel economy is really good point.
Yeah, which is actually really tricky to get the most out of it, you have to do that. There's certain techniques, like with braking and stuff, that you can really, like at Le Mans, you learn it a lot, and you can, at Le Mans, we used to be able to get at least one more lap on a stint by applying a particular braking technique, to use less fuel. So it definitely works, and you can easily, that Scott, for example, is the absolute master of fuel management, because he's kind of figured out that same style,
That's Scott Dixon, of course.
Yeah.
How many IndyCar titles has he won now?
5.
Pretty darn good, isn't he? Actually, that's a good point. Scott Dixon, you're his manager. Why hasn't he had a good crack at Formula One?
It was just timing, so when he won the championship the first time, we had the test with Williams, which went very well. And we were due to have a test with Ferrari as well. We had some meetings with John Todd, and they wanted to do a test as well. But at the same time, he'd done the year with Ganassi. Then we, with Williams, the BMW was obviously the main partner, and they didn't want a rookie in the car, basically. So at the time, we managed to leverage that in getting a really, really, really good deal from Chip for IndyCar. So we kind of ended up in IndyCar, and that's just where the career ended up going,
Do you think Scott Dixon was good enough to shine with the best in Formula One?
I think he would have been world champion had he got, if he'd been in the right, in F1, you have to be in the right car at the right time. And, the timing is so crucial in F1. And there's maybe 2 maybe 3 at the most to actually have the luxury of deciding which team you want to go with at whatever certain time. But if all the stars would line up, he would have, no question, he wouldn't be world champion. I think he's absolutely one of the best in history of any category, in my opinion.
Interesting. Really interesting. But back to Ferrari, mid-80s, very different game back then. But Michele Alboreto is your teammate. And how helpful was that to have an Italian as your teammate at Ferrari? Because did he take a lot of the heat from the media because he was Italian?
No, not really. I'm not sure it was helpful. I think it was... I didn't speak much Italian at the time, but I always knew when they were talking about me, because it was always Il Biondo. Okay, what's going on? we were good friends, Michele and I, already before, because we raced against each other in F3 and stuff. But at the same time, we were fierce competitors, of course. In F1 in particular, the first goal is always to beat your teammate, because that's only the really real reference point you have, But I mean, we had a pretty good relationship, I'd say. I mean, we were good friends always, and but it was fierce at the same time. It has to be when you're in a team like Ferrari. That's you got to get the job done.
So something you alluded to a little bit earlier on, but why did it all come to an end at Ferrari in '86? I remember James Hunt saying they're getting rid of the wrong guy.
Yeah, it was politics. I mean, like I was too wet behind the ears to know, who to stroke. And I think just the Italian component and everything else, I think I did what I set out to do that year, which was to beat Michele in the championships. That, we knew the car wasn't going to be good enough to win races. So my focus was basically on scoring as many points as I could under the circumstances, So, and that's what I did, But politics obviously played a big part of it. And I kind of, at the same time, had my eye on wanting to get better results. And the McLaren opportunity looked like a better bet at the time, So, and the fact that Ron was kind of a friend, I mean, we had a good relationship always. And it just felt like a better option at the time,
On paper, it did. I mean, Alain Prost was the world champion in 1986.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It was obviously, to go to the team, and there was no reason to think then that they weren't going to have a championship winning car again,
There's a couple of other chapters I wanted to ask you about. The first one of which is the whole Honda experience. You were instrumental in helping them develop their turbo engine. Spirit Honda. Can you just sort of talk us through how crazy that was? And perhaps let's start at the beginning, how the deal to work with Honda in Formula One came about.
Well, so, I knew John and Gordon quite well, through the F2 programs and everything. And John ran, when I did, after the F3 championship, then I did F2 with Alan Docking with the Tolman F2 car. Then John Wickham ran the March factory team at the time. And then him and Gordon Copper got the opportunity to do this Spirit deal, in the F2 car. So I ended up driving for Spirit in F2 in '82. With Terry Bootson as my teammate. And about halfway through the season, I think we found out that there was ambitions to do F1 from Honda. We knew that, it was either going to be me or Terry basically being the driver. And we didn't know who either of us really, until then I guess Honda made a decision that they wanted me to be the driver for them. So I think we found out some sort of end of that F2 season, basically.
Was it a speed thing that they were after, or was it sort of politics off track that got you that drive?
I think it was more the speed thing, the Japanese, I don't know why to this day, maybe it's my name, Johansson, that the Japanese really like, because I was always like super popular in Japan, during that period when I spent a lot of time out there, I was more recognized in Japan than I was in Sweden even, it was ridiculous, So I can only imagine it must be something to do with a name or something, Johansson, So anyway, that's kind of what happened, but I always had a really, really great relationship with the Honda guys, and in fact with Japan in general, I always had a lovely time there, and very, still to this day, I have a lot of great friends there, and a lot of people I still am in contact with and work with.
So the chassis, tell me if I'm wrong, was a converted Formula 2 chassis, is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
What, you took that car out to, were you just pounding around Suzuka, or where was all the testing taking place?
We did all the testing in California, believe it or not, at Willow Springs.
Why California?
Willow Springs and Riverside, because of the weather. So this was in the winter, it's like in January. So we flew, because and Honda US is based in Torrance. We used to work on the cars in Torrance, and then we'll take it either to Riverside or to Willow Springs, which both tracks were marginal at best, and safety or anything. But we did a lot of running, and we were there for I think like 6 weeks straight or something, just kept testing, and then a couple of days off, fixing, changing stuff on the car and whatever.
And how did the engine evolve during that time?
Well, it was, the whole year was it got slightly better, but I mean, it had good power. It wasn't really lacking that much in power, but it was just the reliability was very marginal. I mean, I used to joke at the time. I said I didn't need to do any fitness training during the week because I always got to, I put in about 10 miles of running every weekend because remember we had spare cars back then. So the car would blow up, in the first practice session. I'd run back to the pits, get there in time to jump in the spare car, and do the last 15 minutes of practice and then rinse and repeat. Same thing the next day, It was like almost every weekend it was like that.
And how much of a disappointment was it when they said, we're going to Williams for 84?
It was devastating for me, really, because I thought I'd finally cracked it to Formula One. And, now I was in, what I've been dreaming of my whole life since I was a little kid, So it was really tough. And I remember Joost rang me up to do the 12 hours of Sebring, which was the same weekend as the first Grand Prix in Brazil. And I remember we won Sebring and I was just totally miserable and grumpy because I wasn't in Brazil. That's all I wanted was to be in the F1 paddock, and do the Formula One races. So I ended up that year being like the super sub, wherever there was an empty car, I would be there, First with Brundle when Brundle had his bad accident in Dallas, and then with the Tolman later in the year, plus all the Group C stuff and Japan and everything else. Yeah.
God, it's such a fascinating period of growth for Formula One, wasn't it? Those early 80s, both technically and as a sport, and the TV spectacle growing as well. It must have been such an exciting time to be part of it, really.
Yeah. Everything just took off in that period. Yeah. It was amazing. Absolutely. Of course. Yeah.
Probably not much to say about 1988. There's the Ligier. Poor you, really. Didn't they have some novel? Was the fuel tank not behind you and it's behind the engine? Or hadn't they done something?
Yeah, it was. They split the fuel tank in two. So they had half the fuel tank behind, in the normal place behind the driver, and then another fuel tank between the engine and the gearbox.
Yeah.
For the weight distribution. Poor old Tattoo, Michel Tattoo, was the chief designer. I guess he told me somebody just sort of threw it out as one of those thinking loud when he had lunch with Guy Ligier one day, and Guy was like, "Oui, oh, fantastic!" like every 10 minutes is in the drawer. Are you making the car? Are you doing the no choice at that point,
Was it the worst Grand Prix car you drove?
Yeah. Oh, hands down. Arno and I, we used to joke, it was Isaac Newton was the chief aerodynamicist because the only thing that kept it on the ground was gravity.
Actually, that was an interesting teammate for you, given that you'd replaced Arno at Ferrari in 85, and then suddenly your teammates at Ligier in 88. Everything good between you? Did you ever sort of discuss that 85 period with Ferrari?
No, and to this day, no one has been able to give me the reason why they fired Arno. And he certainly wouldn't dwell on it. And no one at Ferrari's ever told me what actually happened. I have no idea what happened. But Arno and I, we got on great. He's a great guy. I love him to death, and we had a really good time together, just as friends as well as teammates, and he was a very good driver, obviously, very, very quick,
We're heading into the final lap of this episode with Stefan. And just before we do that, I've got a quick message for all you dedicated F1 fans. As you know, Formula One is back and the pressure is on. The drivers have been out of action for 4 long months, and now they're being thrown into an intense season like no other, which means only one thing: unpredictable outcomes. Can you predict what others can't? It's time to get your F1 fantasy team ready and prove that you know the most and invite your friends into leagues. So choose your drivers and win exclusive sign prizes. Think you know Formula One? Walk the talk with F1 Fantasy. It's really easy to get started and there's still time to sign up. All you have to do is create a team on fantasy.formula1.com by choosing 5 drivers and 1 constructor. So let me have a think about who I'd go for. How about McLaren as my constructor, and then some up-and-comers behind the wheel? George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz and Esteban Ocon. What do you think? Have I blown my budget? I might have done. Anyway, get your friends involved too by creating a league and challenging each other to prove which one of you knows the most about Formula One. And aside from potential glory over your mates, you can also win prizes on a weekly basis. Plus, there's the main prize of Paddock Club passes to a Grand Prix of your choice in 2021. How fantastic is that? So it's all to play for. And even if you have a bad Grand Prix or two, there will be several mini leagues throughout the season for you to bounce back with, where you can win signed top prizes or get your friends to join. And you can always update your driver lineup before each qualifying session. So create a team on F1 Fantasy, choose your drivers, top the leagues, win exclusive signed prizes, and challenge your friends. Go to fantasy.formula1.com. That's fantasy.formula1.com. Right, back to Stefan. Stefan, when you're struggling with a car as much as you were that Ligier in 88, does it sort of take the rivalry out of the relationship with your teammate? Does it diffuse the situation because it's so bad, we may as well have a good time?
It does to a degree, definitely. Yeah, when you know, I mean, obviously, when you kind of know that you have no chance of winning, then the killer instinct is not there, in the same way as if you know you have a chance of actually winning a race, because there's something happens inside you when you can smell the wind, something, there's a whole different dynamic, definitely.
An extra layer of, is it motivation or yeah?
Well, just you become ruthless, there's just nothing that can stop you at that point. If you can sniff that you got it within a grasp, then you there's just a whole different dynamic,
So look, finally, continuing our theme of the great personalities that you work with in Formula One, Jean-Pierre Van Rossum and Onyx. A colourful character.
Yes.
How did that opportunity come about?
So the Onyx thing came about because it was really a group of really good mates who put this thing together. Mike Earl and Alan Jenkins. Alan and I were really good. We became really good friends through the Project Forward program with Ron. So we used to, spend a lot of time together even then, having dinners and stuff. We lived in Woking, and so we were all constantly in contact, even, between all those years. He was, he ended up going to America and do the Penske thing, but we were always in contact. So when I found out that Mike had hired Alan to do the Onyx car, and I had a tremendous amount of respect for Alan, because, I still think to this day he's one of the smartest guys that's ever been in Formula One, I was very excited about it. And obviously I had enormous amount of frustration with the Ligier program that year. So we started talking about it halfway through the year, probably. And then it sort of came together. We sort of shook hands on it, actually, at the Australian Grand Prix, the last race of the 88 season. But Van Rossum only came into the picture, I think, after one, maybe two races or so. I don't think he was involved in the very, very beginning. Bertrand Gachot brought him into the program, but he wasn't there from the very, very start, I don't think.
His role was simply cash, was it?
Well, so initially his role was just a sponsor. So he came in as a sponsor, but then the team hit financial difficulties. The original investor who was supposed to put up the money didn't. So, and then, one thing led to another. Van Rossum got more excited, more involved in the thing. And then he ended up, putting up more money. And as a result of that, an ownership role as well. So he was, very heavily involved, of course, from that moment on.
So we must talk about Estoril, podium number 12. And extraordinarily, you'd failed to pre-qualify at the race before and the race after, yet there was this beacon of light in Estoril. Just talk us through the weekend and how competitive the car was.
Well, the car was always good, but remember back then, all the cars that was pre-qualifying that year were all good cars. And whoever made it through, those four that made it through, generally qualified in the top 15 every race, and often in the top 10 even. Really good cars, really good drivers in all the teams that had to pre-qualify that year, pretty much. So it was unbelievably tough to make it through pre-qualifying. And if you had the slight glitch with the tires or any anything, because you had that 1 hour, it was literally, you were done. Everything had to run perfect. So it was, just, I can't remember the circumstances from the race before, but anyway, so we got through pre-qualifying pretty comfortably. It was quickest in the pre-qualifying. So we knew we got through that. And then the focus from that moment on was really just race setup the whole time. And Alan and I had a good discussion, and I, throughout all the years, because my focus was generally more on the race than qualifying, because in F1 back then, it was relatively easy to pass in the races as long as you had a good race setup, and you managed the race well. So qualifying position, if you lost 2 or 3 places, wasn't the end of the world, because you could easily make it up if you had a better race car. So the focus was more on the race. So, and what I'd learned from the Goodyear guys from previous years, even with Ferrari, for example, was that, you always, and I spent a lot of time talking with the tire guys. And we made a game plan basically to take one set on Friday already in free practice and just do like 2-3 laps very gently. Just put a gentle heat cycle on them and then put them to the side. And that would be the race set. So we did that on Friday. And then we did the same thing first thing on Saturday morning. So we put 2 very gentle heat cycles with almost scrubbing, no scrub on the rubber. But it was enough to cure them, just enough to have that, a little bit more durability. That was the race set. And the game plan was to do the whole race without a pit stop. And no one else did that. So everybody else had to stop. So I think I qualified 12th or something. So I got up to 7th pretty comfortably just on speed. And then we were just waiting for the rest to do their pit stops. And when that cycled through, we ended up 3rd. And we kept that till the end of the race. Although the left front and that long right-hander before the start-finish straight was, I could see it every lap. The steel, literally canvas, started showing. And in the last 5 laps, it was like hardly any rubber left on the tire. It was just a steel canvas all the way.
It's a remarkable skill being able to drive like that. How do you know how hard to push in the early laps when you know you've got to do the entire race on that set?
It's a feel thing. You just have to feel it. You just got to stay right below where it's scrubbing. As long as you have grip, but it's not loose in the grip, you're fine, So you always stay on that right below where you feel it's starting to scrub, And that's what you got to do the whole time. You have to be really disciplined to just stay in that window the whole time,
And that was one of your many great skills as a driver and something you learned from Group C as well.
Well, I think probably my best skill was to, manage a race well. And I, no question about it, learned most of that in sports car racing,
So when I asked you earlier, best podiums, was that one in 89 with Onyx? Given that you'd had to pre-qualify and everything, was that one particularly special?
Yeah, I think that was probably the best of podiums, because it was so much work went into it and was such a personal thing for all of us, because we all kind of had our setbacks, whatever. And here we are, bunch of guys that we were all good friends, and we've been through all this. It was an unbelievably tough year. The team was on the brink of no finances, and all the problems were pre-qualifying. Emotions were like high all the time, so it was definitely satisfying.
And a nice reminder of your ability. Did it wake up any of the top teams again? And did anyone show any interest for the following year?
Not much, to be honest. No, it really didn't, And the thing is, I already had a contract for the following year with Onyx as well. That obviously then the whole thing just fell to pieces during the winter, and it sort of died almost, But, some funny stories with Van Rossen too, he was... talk about a character. This guy was unbelievable, But we struck up a really good friendship again, we, through the year with all the hardships and everything, you got to know the guy, and he was a great guy, actually, his appearance and everything, he was obviously troubled in some ways, maybe, but he was a gentle, very kind person in the end. What I really admired was that he did everything he promised he would do and more. It took some time and we had to juggle a million different things, but you talk about chaos, I remember, for example, he lent me a Testarossa for the Belgian Grand Prix, just his private car, it's just pick it up there, the garage there and there, so I go there from the airport, pick up this car, And I drive down to the track, and this, when I get there, there's like a shoebox, so on the floor next to the passenger seat, full of cash. A shoe, I don't know how much was in it, but it was like several 100,000 for sure.
Oh my goodness! What? And he'd forgotten it was there.
Yeah, it was just sitting there.
Oh my goodness! So, as you said, the Onyx thing fell apart in 1990, and then there was a bit of footwork and a bit of AGS in 91. But then it all came to an end, and you moved to America a couple of years later and haven't looked back. If I was to say to you, best F1 car you ever drove, what would you say?
The best F1 car I ever drove was a car I never got to race, unfortunately, which was the Tolman 85 car. Unbelievable car. I mean, I tested it in Rio before the season. We had some engine issues, but you could feel the car was just fantastic. It was just an evolution of the 84 car, but way better, much more aero. But Rory had this, I don't know, I mean, the geometry of his cars is incredible because the car is so harmonious. It's just quiet, it's calm. You can feel everything. Some cars are quick, but before from the moment you turn in till you get to the apex, there's like 35 things have happened. There's like all this stuff. His car is just like, all you have to do is just concentrate on getting your turn in, get to the apex, get on the power. It's like calm. It's just a whole different harmony in the car. And the car was fantastic to drive. So lucky Fabi and Berger, whoever ended up driving it, because it was a phenomenal car.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
And best race you drove?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Imola, I guess, was probably one of them, which I should have won. And it probably just changed everything. Had I won that race.
Imola 85, yeah.
Everything would have been, I would have been a contender for the championship that year. Because the car was still, at that point, the championship winning car. It went downhill after that, but yeah.
Wow. Stefan, it's been such a joy just to sort of reminisce with you and talk it all through, and some great stories, and you're loving life in California. And just give us a few lines on what you're up to, particularly this collection of Stefan Johansson Vaxjo. What is it? It's luxury watches.
Well, it's watches, but now I'm talking to you from my studio here, where I'm doing actually most of what I do now is I do the watches, but really my main focus is on my art now. I do a lot of painting.
How long have you been painting?
So I started painting in 86, actually. I mean, I was always interested in art and design and so on, but I started painting in 86 and it's a weird story. And to be honest, I don't really know to this day what prompted me, but when Elio De Angelis got killed, I mean, we were like really tight. We were like brothers almost. We hung out together all the time, had a lot of fun together, and I used to go to dinner almost every night at that period. It really hit me hard. I was kind of lost for a while, and something prompted me to go and buy a canvas and some paint and do something in his memory, whatever. And that got me started, and from that moment on, I've been hooked on it, so I've been doing it more like a hobby my whole life throughout my career. But in the last sort of 5 or 6 years now, I got the studio here where I'm working now, and now I'm really taking it serious. So this kind of is my life part 2, if you like, the art, So I'm trying to, I'm developing it now. I'm selling quite a lot of stuff just through here, but also trying to commercialize it with different products based on my art,
It looks fantastic. Have you ever had lessons, or are you self-taught?
I'm taught myself, yeah. Like most things in my life, you just got to figure shit out as you go along.
But what, are there members of your family who are artists, or? My
grandfather was an artist, so maybe I got some of it from there, yeah. But I've got a few artist friends, that I spend a lot of time with, and they sort of taught me a little bit. I used to hang out with an artist called James Rosenquist. He passed away a few years ago, but I used to hang out with him down in his studio in Florida. And he taught me primarily how to mix colors, to get the right colors, which is really the tricky bit. The idea is the hardest part. You got to get the idea. You got to have the eye to figure out what it's going to look like when you're finished, and then mixing the colors is the other tricky bit for me anyway.
How amazing. And anyone who wants to have a look, it's all on your website, is it?
Yeah, everything's on my website. Yeah, I'm just stefanjohansson.com or .art, either one.
Are you still friends with Mark Knopfler?
Yep. Yeah, I saw Mark right before the whole pandemic started, and I was in London. Yeah, we're still in good contact.
Speedway at Nazareth.
Yeah.
He wrote that song about you, is that right?
Yeah, it was weird because back then, we didn't even have mobile phones, I don't think. So we used to talk, he's on tour and I'm on a race somewhere, and we just both bored on a Saturday night, sort of end up chatting on the phone for a couple of hours, and somehow I guess he chronicled the whole season's conversations and turned it into a song, which is kind of cool.
That is totally cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Stefan, look, what an amazing life you've had. Part 1 as the racing driver and now part 2 as the artist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I hope so, yeah.
Look, thank you very much for your time. It's been wonderful to chat. Are we going to see you at a Grand Prix anytime soon?
I hope so, yeah. Well, whenever things get back to whatever the new normal will be, I'll be at some races, yeah.
Look forward to seeing you. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
If you have a look at Stefan's website, stefanjohansson.art, you'll see that he's really nailed his new craft. And to think it was Elio's death in 1986 that prompted him to pick up a paintbrush in the first place is just so poignant. And there's so much else to relish in that conversation. Senna, Beloff, Ron Dennis, Prost. How many drivers in history have worked alongside so many of the sport's greats? The only thing his career CV lacks is a win. And listening to him describe Imola 85, his second race for Ferrari, when he ran out of fuel while leading almost in sight of the finish line, is emotional and nothing short of cruel. Stefan, thanks for your time. It was great to catch up, and I hope to see you at a Grand Prix soon. That's almost it for this week. But before we go, there's just enough time to sift through the virtual mailbag to see what you've been saying about the show. And we've had a lot of feedback about Alex Zanardi. Almost all of it saying what a legend the man is. Paul Curran says this: what an incredible person Alex is, with an incredible story and such a great sense of humour. Has anyone pissed off Flavio Briatore as much? And I'm shocked to hear about his accident, and I hope he makes a full recovery. Well, Paul, that was a great story about Monza 1991, wasn't it? All those late night phone calls from Flavio were hilarious in hindsight. And we're all wishing Alex a full recovery, of course we are. And here's one from Toby Davis. TC, that was the best F1 Beyond the Grid podcast to date, in my opinion. And it's so sad and ironic that Alex is now fighting another battle. My prayers are with Alex Zanardi and Daniela. Everyone listening will echo those sentiments, Toby. Stay strong, Alex. The world needs people like you now more than ever. We've also had a great message from Nyril C. about the show from 2 weeks ago with Riccardo Patrese. When I was 6 years old, Nyril says, our primary school teacher asked what we wanted to call our new class gerbil. My nomination had the highest number of votes, and the gerbil was named Riccardo, after Mr. Patrese himself. What a guy. Great podcast. Keep them coming. Riccardo, if you're listening, that is one big accolade. What a great story. Thanks, Nyril. Well, that's it for this episode, but of course, we'll be back next week with another big Formula One name. In the meantime, if you want to drop me a message about the show and potentially get a shout out on here, I'm at Tom Clarkson F1 on Twitter, or you can use the hashtag F1 Beyond the Grid. Thanks for listening. Beyond the Grid is produced by F1 in association with Audio Boom. Until next time, Forza Alex.